Fire Emblem. It's more than just a series you side-eye the fans of for, shall we say, its assets. It's also a great bunch of strategy RPGs that have spanned over 30 years of gaming history. But that's not what Fire Emblem is really about. No, as any Fire Emblem fan knows, the true joy of the series comes in twisting yourself up in knots, doing insane challenge runs, all for the prize of saying you still beat the game under such circumstances. And today, we're going to do just that. That being beat Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, the first localized game in the series, without spending any money. If you'd like to see the insanity that ensues, I'll be your guide, William C.W. Please keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, and prepare to witness one of the most madcap Fire Emblem runs I've ever done. Part 1. The Glorified Training Montage. Fire Emblem 7 begins with us getting isekai'd into the plainlands of the continent of Aleed. Luckily, a girl named Lynn is on hand to find us and aggressively trust the hooded figure who just showed up out of nowhere. However, it's not too long before bandits raid, and we have the start of our challenge. Sort of. You see, FE7 is broken up into two distinct story arcs. Lynn Mode, which serves as an extended prologue and tutorial on easier difficulties, and Eliwood/Hector Mode, which is the main bulk of the game. Resources you obtain in Lynn Mode do not carry over into the main game. However, any experience gained does remain, meaning we can power level a few units we'll be planning to use for the main campaign. Speaking of, let's quickly meet the rogues gallery of soldiers who we'll be using to break the game. Starting out, we have the three lords, Lynn, Eliwood, and Hector. Since we're going Eliwood mode for the main campaign, he'll be our main lord. Now normally, he has the potential to turn out the most useful of the three, but he'll be seeing limited use in this run. He uses swords, and swords are a hot commodity that others can use much better than he can. Similarly, we have Lynn. Lynn is generally regarded as bad, and by and large, that's true. However, we're going to train her a limited amount for one very specific late-game operation. Finally, we have Hector, who has the best stats out of the three, but is held back by poor movement that makes getting him into position a little harder. Joining them, we have Kent, who would respectfully like to court Lynn. Sane, who would not respectfully like to court any and all women. Florina, who is super gay for Lynn and has trauma around men that's packed more tightly than a Tetris board. Matthew and Legault, thieves who steal but never really fight. Nils and Ninian, the Deus Ex dancers who sacrifice their turn to give another unit a second one. Marcus, who is so blatantly outstanding that to not use him would border on criminal. Oswin, human filler, a warm body, a chunky strong man. Priscilla, who would respectfully like to court her brother, because it's still Fire Emblem. Pent, who is a glorified physics staff, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He's not secretly one of the best units in the game. And finally, Renault, who's only playable for the last two maps of the game, but he was there, so good for him. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Merlinus, because not only can he freely be used as a decoy, he holds my things for me. We stand the man I abusively leave defenseless on battlefields. Returning to the Plainlands, we begin our journey to hoard as much money as humanly possible. With sword in hand, Lynn bravely cuts down two dudes who are in her way, gaining the first level of the game, and runs off to meet Kent and Sane. And this is where the run really begins. The early game, as early as Chapter 2, is defined by cheesy, naughty strategy. A few things to note about FE7. The first being weapons break after a certain amount of uses. That means that to beat the game, we have to get by on what limited weapon uses the game gives us for free. However, this same rule holds true to the enemy. Their weapons break after a certain amount of uses, the durability of which varies from weapon to weapon. Now normally, enemies will die before their weapons go kaput, but if you're in this deep and you're still expecting normal, that's on you. The other parts of our strategy are twofold. The first bit being that if you sit there, get attacked, and do nothing to retaliate, you gain 1 point of experience. Gain 100 points and you level up. Normally your experience is awarded on a curve as you and the enemy grow in level, but no matter what, unless you've hit the level cap, you gain 1 XP for doing nothing. We also happen to have forts in Chapter 2, which both boost defense and avoid, as well as heal whoever is standing on them at the start of each turn. I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Our first mission is to send Kent, the noble knight of Caelin, to hide out in a fort as bandits smack him with axes, and from the multitude of scars that now ripple across his body, he becomes more attuned to the ways of war, a stronger and more deadly man. By the end of this first training chapter, Kent has gained a solid number of levels, and the enemies are having a hard time doing any damage to him whatsoever, even without the fort bonus. Once the enemies are all out of weapon uses, we have Lynn sweep them away for some XP. The end of chapter 2 is unique in that it awards Lynn with a sword that only she can use, the Mani Caddy. It's lightweight, has good crit rate, and deals extra damage to both cavalry and armor knights, helping Lynn take out enemies she'd otherwise struggle with. What's more, we can use and break it consequence-free in Lynn mode, because in Eliwood mode, it'll go back to fully mended. For both arcs of the game, Lynn will mostly be landing killing blows with this sword. The rest of Lynn mode moves relatively smoothly, albeit not quickly. Breaking enemy weapons is not a fast business by any stretch of the imagination, but between getting Kent to hit his first base class level cap, and then his promoted level cap, as well as training Lynn, Sane, and Florina, Lynn mode is well worth the time put into it for this run. By the time we murder Lynn's great uncle to save her grandpa, we have a massive paladin, a cavalier who hits like a truck, and a flying lesbian. Life is good. Part 2. It's technically not war profiteering. I would like to take this moment to briefly address something. What we're doing here isn't war profiteering, which would be a crime. The reason I say this is because we're technically not fighting a war. FE7's story is about independent soldiers who come together to fight a band of assassins. Neither directly represents a nation, so while we live in the gray area, what we're still doing is legal. By the time we reach endgame, we'll have built up a great rebuilding fund guilt-free. The story picks up 1 year later with Eliwood, whose father has gone missing on the F around and find out Dread Isle. That this has happened is a complete surprise Pikachu faced both Eliwood and his mom, who failed to see the inherent risk in the situation. Deciding to double down, Eliwood concludes the only logical decision is to take himself, completely unproven in combat, and also go to the Dread Isle. Thankfully, however, he does bring along all of 2 soldiers and a random village girl they just sort of found, so I'm sure that everything will be fine. I'm joking, of course, because one of those 2 soldiers is the Paladin Marcus, so everything will actually be fine. And hey, would you look at that? There's a fort on this first map. I think you know what that means. Before you can say waste of time, Marcus is power leveled up to a cap of 20. And honestly, he kinda went odd flex with it. These are the average stats of a level 20 Marcus, and this is what ours did. I'm not sure what the odds of this are, but all that matters is that we have a Marcus who laughs in the face of all magic this game can throw at us, and that's a soldier we can use. By the next chapter, we find Hector and Oswin, who are just sort of wandering around aimlessly looking for Eliwood, and by plot decree are able to find him. This map is interesting in that it's the first kill all enemies map of the main game, and for our purposes, these are the worst type of map. It costs extra weapon uses, especially now, when most of our army has low strength. It may seem inconsequential, but we've got to get through some 20-ish chapters still, and we cannot get any new ones if we run out of our weapons entirely. Nonetheless, we press on for a couple of chapters and make it to chapter 14, another kill all enemies map, but one that's a bit more time sensitive. See that village down there? Priscilla is hiding in there, and if those enemy pirates make it to her before we do, she's done for. So while I'd rather be a bit more systematic and slowly whittle out enemy weapons, I arm Marcus and rush him out to protect our staffer. Staff units are a bit weird in this game, in that the XP you get from healing is locked by staff type. So using a basic heal stave will give you 11 XP every time, which, given how the game only gives you a handful of healing staves to work with, there's only one realistic way to train Priscilla, and that's by having her do the same sort of dance with death Kent and Marcus did, albeit much more slowly over time because her base defense and resistance are not stellar. If this seems like a waste of time, especially when we later get Pent, who can both attack with magic and use staves, I promise you it isn't. Not only do we need utility staves sooner than that, the late game maps are designed in such a way that if we're going to save our weapons to reach the final chapter, we need to employ Warp and Rescue, 2 staves which can teleport characters. Pent will be one of our staff users, but we'll need a second to pull it off. Given that she's got better movement than the other options, putting the effort in now to baby Priscilla will save us later down the line. Speaking of utility staves, we first get to use their power in Chapter 18, which by this point, we've regrouped with Lynn, Kent, Sane, and Florina, so they're all putting in work again too. Chapter 18 is the first Fog of War chapter, where we have access to the Torch Stave and Merlinus, and that means it's the first chapter where we can easily cheat. In Fire Emblem 7, there's an infamous glitch known as the Torch and Mine glitch. To make a long story short, when you use the Torch Staff or a mine, you elect a space on the map to receive the effect. If an enemy is lured onto this tile, reset the game before they end their turn. When you next hit resume, if you've done it right, you'll now be able to control all enemies who have yet to move. You can move them, trade their items around, discard their items, or they can even interact with Merlinus and deposit weapons into the player's army, which is exactly what we do here. It's worth noting that Merlinus can't move around until a very late game, so this is the only chapter where I can easily deposit enemy weapons with him based on his positioning. However, I do abuse Torch Staff and Mines, which can be used on any chapter, not just Fog of War, to disarm enemies on chapters where we simply don't have the time to deal with them. Is it possible to fulfill this challenge without glitches? I can't really say for sure, but I'd love to see someone try. So after deeply disrespecting Uhai by cutting him down with no defenses, we continue through the Dread Isle, finding Ninian and realizing that Eliwood's dad is dead. Now the story is about getting revenge and stopping the man who caused all this, Nurgle. Part 3. Did we violate the Geneva Convention? Jumping ahead a bit, our adventures take us back off of the Dread Isle to the mainland, and eventually into the Nevada Desert, where we meet Pent. We won't recruit him for a couple of chapters yet, but he's a vital NPC for this chapter, both because he saves us considerable weapon uses, and also if he dies, it's game over. I won't lie, this chapter took me about 5 different tries. Pent died, others died, one time my cat jumped onto my keyboard and crashed the emulator, but eventually we prevail and meet the side objective of the chapter, finding all the hidden treasure buried in the sand, which includes the Light Brand, one of the only swords in the game that can hit both near and far enemies. This chapter was Legault's crowning achievement, as most characters have a % chance based on their luck stat to find these items, but thieves find them just by standing in the right area. So basically, the hidden items in the desert got stepped on by the Lego. Eventually, however, we do escape the desert and recruit Pent. His chapter where he joins marks the first time the Lord Trio can start promoting as well. In this case, Hector, as he's the only one who had reached his base level cap, and he is without a doubt the best in combat. Flashing forward a bit to chapter 27, we've by now promoted Lynn as well, and she can use bows in her promoted class. Cog of Destiny is widely regarded as one of the most difficult chapters in the game, and for good reason. Swarms of promoted enemies get rained down on you, both potential bosses are really scary, and it's the final kill-all enemies chapter of the game. So I did what any honorable tactician would do. I buried a medieval mine in the ground, set a man on purple fire, and mind-controlled the army into throwing their weapons into the dirt. While this chapter is still difficult because of the swaths of reinforcements, it makes things a lot more manageable, as by this point our weapons are getting really flimsy and low in supply. As previously mentioned, this is the final kill-all chapter, and this is precisely why we bothered to train Lynn at all. Slowly but surely, the game has given us a generous selection of bows, and I haven't been using any bow units. But now with promoted Lynn and the dancing help of Ninian, we can slowly pick off all the defenseless stragglers and clear out the chapter without breaking any weapons that we'll need to get over the finish line. After a brief stop off in chapter 28 to promote Eliwood, we make our way back to our homeland of Lycia in chapter 2019 for the final defense map of the game. Now, I'll be honest, there are multiple ways to approach this map, and I naturally took the cheesy one. While I missed out on the treasure chests, I just had Lynn park herself on the throne, while Hector hid in the corner with Eliwood cradled in his arms. No one else was deployed, and we didn't try anything fancy here. We just waited them out, conserving as many weapon uses as possible. Chapter 30 is the last hurdle before the endgame chapter, and is going to be a final test of our prowess. A masterclass in strategy, resource management, and I'm kidding, of course, I threw my second mine into the ground. And as the purple fire engulfed the unsuspecting soldier, I began my mind control. While reinforcements in this chapter are scary and frequent, unlike chapter 27, all we have to do is get Eliwood onto the throne tile and we're golden. This mountain-strewn valley is precisely why we bothered to train both Priscilla and Florina, neither of whom proved to be especially potent in combat. But with the powers of first warp and rescue chaining, and finally Florina rescuing Eliwood and carrying him across the mountains, we're able to escape the reinforcements just in time. Here we are, the Dreadgate, the final chapter. Victory is within reach. All we have to do is survive this boss rush and then beat the fire dragon. Spoiler alert for a 22-year-old game, the final boss is a dragon. What makes this chapter both scary and possible for us is that during the boss rush, the enemies will drop the special weapons required to defeat the dragon. The only catch being those weapons hit like a truck and can wipe us if we aren't careful. Thankfully, our ace in the hole, Athos, is here to help. Not only does he bring holy weapons for himself, Eliwood, Hector, and Lynn, but he also has ginormous stats and is used for very cheesy strats to destroy the final dragon. By the time we kill the bosses, end Nurgle, and reach the dragon, you'd think we'd want to pull on the power of the holy weapons, right? Wrong. We use the dark magic tome Luna, which ignores enemy resistance and can shatter the dragon faster than anything else. With a few hits and accidentally getting Athos killed because I clicked too quickly, the dragon has only a few health left. Raising Durandal high above his head, Eliwood finishes the job, and we beat Fire Emblem 7 without spending money. In case you're wondering just how much cash we stockpiled, we got 155,000 gold, which is a pretty insane amount and also still isn't the maximum possible. We also got 2 old men killed and an edgy boy ran off somewhere, so I wasn't able to recruit everyone safely. What I'm saying is, I'm sure it's possible to do this challenge better than I did, but also I'm satisfied with how I did. If you feel satisfied with how I did, hit the subscribe and like buttons. It'd mean a lot and encourage me to bring more wacky gaming challenges to you. Have a nice day.